Well, Mike, or Bailiff Lompier, shall we say, for today, why is 1769, the 28th of September 1769, so relevant or significant today?
Well, there was a mini-revolution in 1769 in Jersey. It was an era when there were lots of revolutions going on, American Revolution, French Revolution. But the big element in Jersey was the separation of the powers of the royal court from the government. In those days, the government, the states, was very, very small, very unimportant. As a result of that process, they overthrew the government. Tom Grouchy and his friends, a few hundred others, marched into town. The court was in session, as you say on your blog, and they overthrew the government. And the result was that the bailiff's powers were removed to a large extent. There was a states was established, and there was a code of laws was written that was, because they were desperate to know, what are our laws? We don't understand our laws. And that process continues right up to this very minute. This week, the Chief Minister has tabled a proposition that the bailiff, he would look like this, he would have worn the same outfit in the 18th century as he wears today, all the trappings, that great, as they keep telling us, all this wonderful history and culture and the tradition of Jersey, but it's not so wonderful in practice. Now, the Chief Minister is taking it upon himself, at long last, that the bailiff should not be chairing Speaker in the States, and that is a continuation of this very same movement from 1769. It's the process continuing.
So, well, it's not just the Chief Minister, in fairness, it was Monty Taddy that originally brought it, but we're talking about millions of pounds worth, as mentioned on the blog, of reports saying, look, the bailiff has to go. Well, Tom Grouchy couldn't do it by the looks of things in 1769. All these millions of pounds of reports can't seem to do it in 2017. How do we get rid of the bailiff?
Well, it's a process. I mean, to say that there's nothing's happened from 1769 until today isn't true. People like Abraham Lacroix in the 19th century fought, campaigned. He had a load of followers, and they petitioned the Privy Council, and there was a huge commission came over to look at Jersey and Guernsey, how the laws, civil criminal laws, how they operated, and the roles of various things. And there were changes made about the royal court that were implemented then, and also about the same time they started to introduce elected deputies, a few elected deputies in town. By degrees, this process does take place, but the bailiff still reigns supreme.
So all these changes that were made, democratic changes and everything, were they forced upon us by the UK?
To a large extent, yes. They came as a result of outside inquiry. 1771, the code, the complaints, the petitions from Jersey, Tom Grouchy and his friends, they sent off to the Privy Council, the King in Council, and these things had to be endorsed by the Privy Council. So the Code of 1771, which was funny enough, was referred to this week in the States. I heard it being referred to, being quoted. It's still used. It's largely a meaningless document now, but it is still referred to. There are still little nuggets in there about constables being elected, which again is another point. Constables, personally, I would like to see them out of the system, but in 1771 they were seen as a key democratic part, that there was these elected people they were seen as then to be to represent people, to let their views be known at parish levels, and they had to consult with the parishioners. This was the key point. But you've got to bear in mind that at that time, so women didn't have the vote, very few people actually had the vote. The democratic process was totally different from what it is.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Who exactly were electing these constables back then in the 1700s?
Very few people there, and basically, well, it was we're doing a bit of research on that subject now, who actually chooses the constables. But even then it was even worse, and of course, once they were in office, it was very difficult to get rid of them. But until 1771, it was a very vague process. They were put up, and it was all family, friends, very much so. And of course, there was the beginning of a party system, as we keep told, the Laurels and the Watsits, the Rose and the Laurels. That party system was going because of a personal dislike of the bailiff, the guy who wore this outfit. That was the Charlots, as they used to call it. That was very much a personal thing about personalities, very much about personalities in those days. So that's how people got chosen. Jurats, rectors, it was all very personal.
Well, it's not. And amongst some of your stuff you've got there today is, which is relevant for today, is how they sort of shut down what do you call it, dissenters sort of thing.
There was no newspaper in Jersey in 1769, so there's no actual local reports. Reports are very minimal. Fortunately, we've got this guy, Shebbeare, who became a great friend of the revolutionaries, and he came here and did research and wrote this 2-volume history, and the title tells you, doesn't it? An authoritative narrative of the oppressions of the Islanders of Jersey, 1769, 1771. He published this. It was very influential in his day, and the Lompriere family went around destroying copies because they didn't like it.
The Lompriere family, there was a bailiff for the acting bailiff.
That's right. Their family controlled everything. They were the acting. They were very influential in their time. Very wealthy, of course. Mostly into. They had farming interests, but they were also into privateering, smuggling, slave trading, all those sort of activities, which in their context. This is why I'm trying to dress up in this so people can see the context. You've got to view things through their eyes to an extent. But that is the history, that is the tradition which the bailiffs today want to celebrate. That's what they want to say. It doesn't warrant celebration, a lot of it.
Well, so going back to the 1771 and along, they're trying to close down people who are speaking out against.
Well, this is an extract from the court records. When the revolutionaries went into the Royal Court, they forced them to write up various things, reforms they wanted. They wrote them into the pages. Now, these are photocopies from that, and they've scribbled them out. The government of the day scribbled them out. And even today, I'm sure, still trying to get those read so we can actually find out now, 250 years later,
reforms were wanted.
What they actually wanted. Now, we know to a large extent, petitions were sent off to the Privy Council, which are all in these books. They were sent off, but there were no local newspapers. It wasn't until later. I mean, this is Matthew Alexandre. He was a Huguenot. He was very innovative. 1780s, beginning of the 1780s, they started to produce a local newspaper. Immediately he was closed down. They sued him for libel, the establishment, because he criticised the establishment. This guy who wrote this, he was sued in the UK. He went to jail for 3 years, he was put in the pillory. This is what they used to do, people who spoke out. It's traditional, it's nothing new. When you're on your computer putting your blogs, they're trying all the time to close you down, to silence you, to expressing any dissent. Nothing's changed. This is part of the tradition which these guys who wear this want to maintain. And this is why it's got to change. We've got to get rid of this feeling that this is somehow desirable just because it is.
Well, again, it just shows, as you just explained there, that anybody who speaks out, just gets through then. I suppose it was the corrupt royal court, and they get silenced. I mean, were they back then? Do you know? Were they having secret court cases like they do now in order to silence people?
Oh yes, I mean a lot of it took place in secrecy. A lot of it did take place. Of course, there was no newspaper to report it in, so the general public wouldn't know. Word of mouth, they might know. So until 1780s, when a little newspaper came along, but they tried to close him down for reporting what was going on. That was one of the very issues.
Did they close him down?
He didn't. He managed to survive, but I don't know how. But afterwards, he was much quieter. He didn't make the same sort of criticisms. So, you can draw from that what you like. But that's what they try to do today. As we all know, there's current legislation pending to try and close down.
Well, P19 has already gone through, hasn't it? That's the exact same thing as what you're saying here, isn't it?
They try to limit freedom of speech. And it's, again, there's people like Tom Grouchy. They're not valued, they're not appreciated, they're not known of in Jersey. These people ought to be heroes. They really ought to be heroes. And lots of people, Abraham Leclerc, lots of other people, Norman LeBrock, they're sort of, in a way, despised because they are anti-establishment. And this is how it is. The guy who brought this proposition, Deputy Pittman, as he was then, look what happened to him. He's ruined, effectively ruined. And why? For free speech. It was an issue of free speech which finished him off. He might have been slightly foolish to do that, but nevertheless, that's what it was. Free speech, expressing his views on something. And he complained he'd been libelled, ironically.
And of course, the same was said for former Senator Stuart Sivray. He had his blog closed down by Google because of the Jersey Crown officers, wasn't it?
Yeah, we've got a guy this week, or last week, or week before, shown to be telling lies in the States, a States member in the 21st century, and he's still there. So the outsiders who, in generally speaking, Pittman was a member of the States, but the outsiders, the general public, the facility, the ability to make criticism, it's worrying. It can cost you everything.
So what is the way forward then? Just to kind of wrap this up if we can. Here we are, 248 years later, and nothing has changed. Is anything going to change, and how can we change it?
Well, if the proposition is successful, if the bailiff, the office of bailiff is not about the personality, if the office of bailiff is removed from the States, that would be a huge, huge step forward, because things will come from that. That will obviously the structure of the government, the structure of the courts will have to be changed, because at the present time the bailiff as a judge spends a great deal of time doing states matters. If you get on with his judicial matters, I put the challenge out time and time again. Name a bailiff who's ever done anything, any major cases that you've ever heard, any protecting the rights of people. Where's the judgment? Oh, you know, they go on like 500 years of age. What have they done? Who can name a bailiff before Coutances in the Second World War? Who can go back in here and even name one? These are, to a large extent, they're non-entities, and they're put up because the job has to be done, because they want that control.
So a major step forward will be removing in reform, removing the bailiff
It'll be
from...
immense. It's what they were trying to do in 1769. If it's achieved now, it'll be wonderful.
So let's hope in a year's time we can have another discussion on a different level.
We should, hopefully, if there is still a Jersey paper, we'll read it in there. This is the equivalent of the Gazette de Lyon. So there we are. Let's hope so.